sunny Deptford today to St Paul's. When I first catch sight of the church, I feel my hands drop to my sides and I don't want to walk anymore. I just want to take it in. In 1710, in response to the growing population of London, and also to corral dissent in the increasingly literate inhabitants, bringing them into the Anglican tradition, the New Churches in London and Westminster Act of Parliament created a commission for building 50 new churches. Because they couldn't count, they only completed 12, but all of them are highly recognisable to Londoners. 8 of them are completely or partly by Hawksmoor, but 2 are by Thomas Archer, Smith Square, which is right by the Houses of Parliament, and St Paul's in Deptford. I'm meeting Fr Paul Butler, who, I must confess, utterly charmed me during my long visit. He was singing morning prayer as I arrived.
To some degree, St Paul's continues to be cited. This amazing building, it stood here from 1730 when it was opened. The young architect Thomas Archer, who did a grand tour in the 1690s when he was a late teenager, he goes to Padua, ends up in Rome. He sees literally Borromini and Bernini done live, and he walks into the Piazza Navona, and there he sees the magnificent San Agnese in Agone. And there inside that church, when you go into that church, you suddenly think, well, the decoration is a little less extreme in St Paul's Deptford, but it's like you're in St Paul's Deptford. But basically what he did was he took the dimensions, he took the 8 Corinthian columns, and then he literally walks out of San Agnese, walks a little way down the little vicolo, which brings you into another piazza where there is the beautiful Santa Maria della Pace, and has this magnificent portico by the Pietro da Cortona, Peter of Cortona. That portico, this interior, mean that whenever you're in St Paul's Deptford, you're always in Rome. A little bit of Rome.
Okay. Unlike, for example, I don't know if it's really fair to say this, but unlike, say, the Gothic style, it's not a humble style. It's quite brash and commanding.
But surely, once we, I mean, if you've lived in South London for very long, you know that the nature and character of South London and its community
is brash and commanding.
Is very in your face. I think, in a very strange way, the Baroque works quite well in what I would call out there kind of places. I think what's kind of interesting here is that the openness of this building, because you have to remember the fact of this is like Jesuit theology. I mean, the idea of an 18th century church basically taking the best of the Reformation, so that you've got nothing unnecessarily hidden. Everything, in a sense, is opened up. You can see everything from everywhere. And at the same time, you have the craft and beauty that connects the work of people's hands. I mean, at one level, that's something that unifies, I think, both the Gothic and the Baroque, that the artisan worker and the offering of work is very much appreciated. I mean, what you can see with your camera, but the image, the painting up here, some of them are said to be portraits of some of the men who built this church. Mm-hmm. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I think it's a good possibility. Mm. But in the midst of it all, you've got a classic Baroque sort of sunburst, the glory of God. If you were in a Jesuit church, almost certainly you'd get Our Lady and the saints being the beatific vision would be there. I've been in a church, I've been in some churches in other parts of Europe where they have these Baroque curtains revealing the glory of God. And it's kind of remarkable to think that, really. It's like a stage. And part of the commission that was made for this church and the 50 churches, part of the commission was that they should be a bit theatrical. Because when you stand here, you see...
Oh, it is very theatrical.
Here, it's like, if you've ever been on a stage, it is like a stage. You know, and you've got people in the galleries and people down here. And weirdly, although when you go a bit higher up in the building, you get a real sense of how massive the church is. But when you're down here, it's almost like an optical illusion. It makes you feel quite near each other. Of course, originally, the pulpit was in the centre, and it was three-decker, as the style was. The pews were all box pews. They were in 4 quadrants. There was like a perfect Greek, this is like a perfect square, the actual interior of the church. So you came through here, and there was you've got the cross like this, and it was very clear. There was a corridor, and a corridor, and a corridor. So you've got a perfect Greek cross built in the church. This is the only door we have left where the church wardens sit proudly. But if you're only a little bloke like me, I mean, if I was sitting behind there, you wouldn't even see me. Because whilst we think of pews now as being a bit old-fashioned, pews were quite radical, because what they did was that they broke up the Victorian family, because they basically were saying, you can sit next to anybody. And some of the more scurrilous newspapers were there sort of suggesting that Anglo-Catholic priests were enabling young men and young women to have access to each other.
What's your favourite artwork in the building?
Favourite artwork?
Have you got a favourite?
Well, I don't know. I'm a big devotee of Our Lady, so I rather like our statue of Mary. Our statue of St Paul's okay. He's a bit battered.
Why does St Paul have the sword? He wasn't very fighty, was he?
No, because he was beheaded.
So,
here's the clue always that saints either carry something they were renowned for doing, or something, or a way of how they died.
So it's like St Lawrence with his gridiron.
Exactly.
Okay.
Normally when I ask children that question, visitors, schools and things, my favourite ever answer was, why has St Paul got a sword? Was he a ninja? Was he a ninja? This piece here, can you see this image of St Paul? He has a sword. Can you see what the sword is there? And I think you sort of see it come. It's quite a long sword.
Yeah.
Now that piece of stained glass was commissioned to originally go in the centrepiece here, and it was in memory of Charles Burney. The reason it's there rather than here is because in the late 19th century, that this was taken from there, put here, and there was a stained glass window of Christ ascending, of the Ascension. So from about the end of the 1870s until not much more than 20-something years ago, if you came into this church, what you saw was a stained glass window there. During a restoration project of the church just over 20 years ago, there was a fire and the stained glass window was lost. What you've now got is that the original, in a sense, apart from the 2 pieces by Alan Younger, right and left in memory of one of my other predecessors, David Diamond, Father David. Otherwise, the church originally only had clear glass. So this kind of clear glass in the Venetian window is what you would have seen in 1730. I quite like that in a way. I think stained glass doesn't really work with Baroque churches. It wasn't made for Baroque churches, although many Baroque churches have stained glass. But the whole idea of the interplay between light and shadow, there's always something of the Caravaggio in this building. I mean, even the time we've been standing here, the light levels have changed. Yeah. Now, if we were in a Gothic church, they'd been more or less the same the whole time.
It's fairly dim.
Fairly dim, all the time. Yes, indeed. Yeah. Indeed. Do you want to go in the gallery?
Let's have a look in the gallery. That'd be fabulous.
Because the ceiling work was done by a man called James Hands. I imagine he got the reputation of Hands, and then that became his surname, like his calling card. Okay. James Hands. And the only other place where his work survives is in the upper library of Queen's College, Oxford. But the upper library at Queen's College, Oxford is quite small. It's a beautiful library. You'd get the entirety of the work in what almost like the central piece here, which is largely simply plastered. There is this beautiful ornate plasterwork. Some of it looks very similar to the style of work, but on a more delicate and small scale. than this rather. This is more like this is more like kind of Picasso in his glorious days.
Was this part of Archer's scheme?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, it's actually remarkable it survived, because that means there's not been a significant fire.
It's been repainted and obviously cleaned from time to time.
Yeah.
But and because the Luftwaffe didn't put a bomb through the ceiling of the church, but it's remarkable that when you think, so often those bomber pilots, they flew on these lines that we didn't get, because we are
almost miraculous. Yeah.
Almost as the crow flies.
It's so near the
almost
docks.
As the crow flies.
Yeah.
So, and in a way, that's partly why this church is so remarkable and special. To John Betjeman, who was a visitor of this church, who visited it in his lifetime, but it was beloved by him. He loved this church, and when the trees weren't quite so overgrown, and this was his quote, because it's the play on Baroque, because Barocco means a misshapen pearl. It's its origin. So a pearl at the heart of Deptford is exactly what a Baroque church is in any community. But it's a lovely quotation, and sometimes you hear people misquoting it and saying a pearl in the heart of Deptford, but Betjeman said at the heart of Deptford.